In the previous video, we went through and showed you how to do the array, how to set up an array inside of Objective-C. Now we're going to actually go through and do a for loop to loop through this particular array elements, or the array elements that we have. So the for loops inside of Objective-C are pretty much exactly what you would expect in a C for loop or a Go for, well, Go's a little different, but C would be more appropriate. And again, Objective-C is based around the C language, so it only makes sense. So what we have is we have our first variable that we're going to use as our counter, and then we're going to tell it how long we want to count. So in Objective-C, in order to find out how many elements are inside of the items array, what we're going to do is we're going to tell it that we're working with items, and we're going to call a function called count. So it's actually a function or a method inside of Objective-C for an array that will return how many items are in that particular array. And then we're going to tell it how we want to increment our counter, and we'll just tell it to increment like this, and then we'll have our opening and closing brackets. So at this point, we have declared our for loop. And as you can see, everything is fairly straightforward. It's a lot like a C-style for loop. But now what I want to do is, now we're in the process of creating an iPhone app, but I'm going to keep this simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a function called NSLog. And NSLog is actually a way to print things to the console. Now you'll notice this is a C-style function call, not an Objective-C style or an Objective-C function or method. So we're going to, again, we're going to declare this, and this is just the way that this works. It's a little strange, but it's the way they do it. So at this point, you can kind of think of NSLog as a printf, except for all the at things that are in here. Now the first at, I'm a little confused about, but it basically is declaring a string that we're going to be sending to NSLog. So you have to have the first at to tell it that we're going to create a string on the fly. The second % is what you would typically see inside of C, where you have a %i for, or %d or %, whatever f. It's the type of variable that we're going to print here. Well, Objective-C actually has the ability with this %a to send any type of variable into this thing, so I don't actually have to do a %d or a %c or whatever it happens to be. I can actually do a %a, and then anything I want to pass into it, it knows how to deal with it. So we're going to pass it in that way. Now, the first thing that I want to pass to this is I want to have it print from my items array, and I want it to print an item at a particular index or a particular item, because we're looping through this 0, 1, 2, 3, as we're going through, which, by the way, I forgot to initialize my variable. So what I want to do is we're going to send it an Objective-C function call. We're working with items, and then we're going to tell it to send it object at index. I'm going to hit enter, and then it wants to know what index. Well, I'm counting through I, so that would be a good thing to send to it. And then we're going to end that particular line. So, and actually this is our our C function. NSLog is again a C function, not an Objective-C. So it has the normal % or parentheses around the function call with the variables that you're sending to it. So in this case, we have the type of thing, how do we want to display it, and then what do we want to pass into it so that it knows how to deal with it. So as you can see, the for loops are very straightforward. They're like you would expect a for loop to be. We still have to deal with this, some Objective-C being mixed in here. So the one key concept here is that we actually have the ability to mix C and Objective-C together to create our final program. So you don't have to write every single thing you're doing inside, with the Objective-C syntax. You can kind of limit it to just the GUI side of things and write everything else in C if you want to. And then once we get our for loop laid out, we then are calling a NSLog feature that goes out and prints this. So let's see what actually happens when we run this application. So I'm going to select the run button over here. We'll let it go out and build the application, and then it should bring up our emulator here in a second. And we really are not really that concerned with what's in the emulator. The main thing that I want to do is come back over here to the application and look at what printed. So our NSLog function that we called here actually printed the name of the application that we're running, and then the variables or the values of each array element inside of that array. So it looped through and printed all of the different things that are inside of that particular array. Now, one of the other things that we could have done, and this is just a feature, I'm going to hit the stop button up here. This is just a feature of Objective-C. I could have come in here and just said NSLog and do our %A again, or at, and just sent in items. Now, Objective-C knows that this is actually an array, so it knows when I call NSLog to actually print out all of the array elements when it gets called. So we're doing our for loop above. So what we should get here when we run this is we should get the array printed out twice, if that works. So at this point, you can kind of see down here, again, back over here in the code, that we have the printout from our for loop, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 3, 2, because of the insert we did. And then you can see this is what happens when we call NSLog and don't actually do a for loop. We just pass it in that array element. So this %at figured out that we were working with an array and then went through and gave us the values of each element in the array without us actually having to do the for loop. So NSLog is actually, with this %A, is actually pretty powerful for kind of giving us some idea of what we're doing and what we have in different elements when it prints out.